Invisible Injury by David Tensen. I didn't judge you when you fell sick with the virus after the long flight home. I didn't shame you when you couldn't walk without crutches after the severe car accident. I didn't avoid you when you couldn't breathe without oxygen mask after the minor stroke. And I didn't pressure you when you couldn't talk without a slur after the jaw reconstruction. So please, don't judge me when I leave the party without warning. It's the anxiety. Please, don't shame me when you need to talk, but I just can't. It's the burnout. Please, don't avoid me when I can't walk without cloudy countenance. It's the depression. Please, don't pressure me when I can't tell you why I feel fragile like I do. It's the PTSD. It takes a compassionate heart and patient witness to honour another's invisible injury. For like outer injuries of the body, no one chooses them, but many steward them. God, help us to love and judge not. So I wrote this piece in October 2018. I think I was only just a few months out from some significant recovery from burnout and PTSD as well. You see, for me, I'd been itinerant, which means for those listening is you travel from church to church on weekends and you preach and you do your thing, and for me, I would always arrive a few days earlier and often sit with pastors and leaders and people who volunteer in often leadership positions who were hurting and wounded, and I got to see some of the real ugly side of the institutional church, which made Sundays never seem the same. You see, I couldn't walk into a church service and just ignore everything that I'd seen and known that week, not only in that congregation, but above them all. In medical profession and other places where they talk about trauma stewardship, we call it trauma exposure, and it's when you're exposed to different trauma. And you can't see that thing the same anymore. So there was nearly 12 months where I never attended a service because I couldn't even get in the car to go. I couldn't even walk through the door without beginning to feel so fragile and so exposed, and my nervous system would be shot. And there was a time I didn't know if I'd ever go back to a church service or maybe even hop on an aeroplane before, because it had all caught up with me. But from the outside, if I met an old friend at a cafe or a restaurant, or even, in a workplace setting, they'd say, "Where'd you go on the weekend?" or "Where do you guys go to church?" And it was kind of difficult in many ways not to feel the pressure. When you're feeling burnout, when you're struggling with mental illness and things that affect you from the inside, there is this extra element of feeling judged, even if you're not, even if the other person might understand. There is just this thing in culture where there is a chasm between the visible and invisible injuries. And I wrote this piece just to try and explain or expose this desire of a lot of us who do or may have in some season in life felt the weight of a mental health illness like depression or anxiety or burnout or PTSD and all the effects and complexities that go with those. You see, if I had a major back injury, or I was sustaining some kind of physical injury, or was had a stroke, or had a car accident, there would be no question where I didn't go somewhere on the weekend, or I couldn't stay at a party, or I couldn't attend a family event. There would be no question. It would just be like, oh yeah, Dave's still recovering. We'll make allowances. But when the injury is invisible, there is so much complexity, and sometimes the last thing you want to do is talk about it and explain again why you feel this way. Because although mental illness is being talked about more and more, there is still shame around it. There is still a stigma around it in society and also in the Christian church. And so I wrote this on behalf of those, as a voice for those who have felt the sting of these kind of injuries, invisible injuries, to say, hey, you know what? I didn't judge you when you had all these physical ailments. Please don't judge me when I'm not able to do what I used to do as well, or not able to fulfill the expectations you have on me. And this was a pretty popular poem, and even as I am recording this, Natalie and I are preparing a 6-week course on mental illness and spiritual considerations, because anytime you talk about any kind of injury, I think you have to consider the spiritual implications of that. And sometimes the cause is spiritual. Sometimes part of it can be solved with an adjustment spiritually, things that we can work through. But quite often it's everything. It's the body, the soul, and the spirit, and that's why we're wonderfully and beautifully, fearfully made. So again, here's the piece, and I want to dedicate this to those who are walking or have walked for quite some time with an invisible injury. And my prayer is this poem helps to give you a voice and confidence, and you might even share it with friends to say, hey, you may not, it's hard for me to actually voice and talk about what's going on inside, because it's even hard to put words to sometimes, but I wouldn't judge you if you had a physical injury. So please be patient, kind, and gracious to me too. And for those who are dealing with this, and you are a follower of Christ, and you may have come from a church or a denominational belief that no, Christians don't suffer with mental illness. Jesus said don't be anxious and all this stuff. Man, my prayer is that you would learn to be gentle and kind and compassionate towards yourself and your inner life and your soul, in the same way that you would be compassionate and kind and understanding of yourself if your body suffered an injury. Here's the piece again. I didn't judge you when you fell sick with the virus after the long flight home. I didn't shame you when you couldn't walk without crutches after the severe car accident. I didn't avoid you when you couldn't breathe without oxygen mask after the minor stroke. I didn't pressure you when you couldn't talk without a slur after the jaw reconstruction. So please, don't judge me when I leave the party without warning. It's the anxiety. Please, don't shame me when you need to talk, but I just can't. It's the burnout. Please don't avoid me when I can't walk without cloudy countenance. It's the depression. Please, don't pressure me when I can't tell you why I feel fragile like I do. It's the PTSD. It takes a compassionate heart and patient witness to honour another's invisible injury. For like outer injuries of the body, no one chooses them, but many steward them. God, help us to love and judge not. Thanks for listening to this podcast. It's available on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, davidtensen.com, and also on our Patreon page, patreon.com/leaderheart, where you can find more stuff and support us through a monthly donation. If you are listening to this on iTunes, I would really appreciate a rating and a review. It would really help get the word out there. Till next time, Shalom.